What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Overwatch League Report. I'm your host, Tamur, filling in for Brian, and I'm joined, as always, by Ben. How's it going, Ben?
It's going great. Ready to talk some Overwatch Stage 4 222 roll lock. Let's go.
Yeah, it's getting really interesting, and it's definitely a refreshing change from the last stage. Just want to check in, though. Are you fully recovered from this weekend? We had kind of a busy weekend. Spent some time with friends in Rhode Island. Just wanted to check up on you.
Yeah. We had a wicked good party where we were celebrating our 1,000 subs. Now we're almost at 1,300 subs, so we can't even party fast enough.
Yeah. So I thought it'd be fun to start off this episode by going through the MVPs. We now know the five players who are up for the MVP slot this year, and yeah, I want to hear your take on this. So we have Sinatra and Super, of course, of San Francisco Shock. We have Janu and Twilight from Vancouver Titans, and Gushue from Hangzhou Spark. So these are the five that are up for MVP. What do you think, Ben?
Yeah, it's a interesting group of five with only three teams being shown. No NYXL players, no
Yeah.
Mono, no Jonak, who is the reigning MVP,
Hmm.
um, the reigning league MVP at least, because there's also the finals MVP, which was
Right.
Profit.
Right.
But yeah, so no players from that team being represented. We have two from the Shock and two from the Titans, which is not super surprising given that I would say those are the two most dominant teams and probably two teams that have the highest likelihood of making a deep run into the season playoffs, especially after the performances this week. So we do
Hmm.
have Super and Sinatra, who I think are the probably the two biggest faces of the Shock for stage 1 through 3. And each of them actually only played one map this week
Yeah.
uh, because the Shock's roster is so deep that they have all these other options.
Hmm.
But yeah, you can definitely say that both of them have had a huge hand in the Shock making it to all three stage playoff finals. And like Super is very much the face of the team. He's a very big personality, and he's obviously talked about as one of the best, if not the best, Western main tanks. And you also have Sinatra, who I think is probably the favorite to win the MVP. Um, who is probably the best Zarya in the world, at least within the GOATS meta that we've seen for the last three stages.
Hmm.
And he is also, on top of that, a really strong DPS player in general. Um, and then we have the two members from the Titans. I was actually surprised about. I think that Twilight is definitely the probably the number one pick if you were to take an MVP from that team.
Hmm.
But I'm a little surprised that Janu is the number two. I don't know what if you have any opinions on Janu being the second member from the Titans.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, I guess in my mind, I would have expected Bumper to be in there instead of Janu, but maybe they didn't want, the two like Rhines, as far as like, the five choices with Super versus Bumper and like Sinatra versus Twilight, I suppose. But I don't know. Yeah, it is a little bit surprising as good as Janu is. But my cards would have been for Bumper for sure.
I actually am surprised that we don't see Slime in there. I think
Mm,
that Slime is probably, in my opinion, at least through the Goats meta, the second best member of the Titans squad.
hmm.
And I know that Brig is super boring, but Hoxel I think is one
Yeah,
of the better Brigs in the league, and I think that we saw this week that he has a high potential
yeah,
of being a hard carry for the team in 2-2-2 roll lock. So he's,
exactly.
I think, somebody else who, in my mind, I think Johnny would have been my fourth pick.
Hmm.
And then I think that Bumper would have been my fifth. I think that Bumper gets a lot of support from the team, and that
That's
allows
true.
him to play so balls to the wall.
Hmm.
and he's definitely a big personality. But I think that he definitely requires the rest of his team behind him in order to succeed in the way that he does.
That's a good point.
Uh,
Yeah, actually, I would have liked to seen Hexel in this as well, just because he was such a god Genji this week, and
yeah,
even like seeing him in there, I probably would have taken Super out of this lot just because I mean, as we saw this week, he only played once, and Sinatra is the sort of player I'm sure he's going to see a lot more time, but Super I kind of see him on the bench a lot more going forward. Sinatra I think can really be a strong DPS for them among these new players. So
yeah. No, we did talk about this going into this, where we speculated that Smurf might see more play over Super
mm,
when in this meta, which is going to be much more Orisa heavy, where Smurf seems to be the more competent Orisa player, at least from the perspective of the team coaching. And we did see that this week with in their one match, Smurf playing in 3 out of the 4 maps. Okay, so now that we talked about those 4 players, we do have a 5th player here, which is kind of a little bit of a a little bit of a dark horse candidate,
hmm
somebody who I'm actually very happy to see represented in
hmm
Goushway.
yeah.
What do you think about Goushway's inclusion on this list as the only non-Shock and Titan member?
I think it's great. I mean, obviously, Chinese player on Hangzhou Spark. He's a really, really strong player. I'm glad. I think about last year with Jonak winning as a team, as a member on a team that didn't make it to the finals, which I think that's to me what this MVP slot really should go towards, because obviously you have these top 2 teams, very, very strong. Whoever makes it to the finals, I think people are kind of looking toward Titans and Shock being in those last 2 teams, although we'll get into that later in the show. Um, so yeah, I'm really glad to see Gouche in there personally. Um, really strong Winston. What do you think?
No, I'm very happy to see him, and I think that he definitely is the best player on the Spark. And
Mm,
it shows, given that it's mostly a Korean roster, but they do allow him to play over No Smite, who could be filling that role to have a full all Korean starting squad, because he's
mm,
that good that they're able to sacrifice the ability for them to com in Korean. Instead, they com. Actually, I believe they might actually still common Korean, and I think that Goushway learned some Korean in order to support that.
right. Huh.
But at the very least, they either common English, which shows that they're able to be flexible in their communication
Yeah.
department in order to support Goushway in that role, or Goushway is common in a language he doesn't speak,
Hmm.
which is super impressive if that's the case. I mean, you gotta hand it to him, who is able to be kind of a leader on this team
Hmm.
in a position where he's kind of like not necessarily the most obvious cultural fit. And I think the Spark are a top 5 team and do have a chance at a potential run here. So I'm
Yeah.
very happy to see that. And if we're going to have some diversity in terms of teams with this top 5, I'm glad that he's the one to be that diverse candidate.
Yeah, I mean, I do wish it was a bit more diverse, and I guess this is the sort of thing where these candidates feel based off they feel based off of the goats meta, which we've obviously seen all season. But going into this last stage, feels like it's changing a lot of things. I'm
Mhm.
sure if this had applied, we would have seen different players up here. Um, so I guess with that, let's get into it. We had stage 4, week 1, and it was something totally fresh. I mean, we saw a lot of different heroes being played that we had not seen in the past. For example, Reaper really being a strong pick. Some Junkrat, the Orisa Hog meta is now a very, very prevalent selection for players. And I think with that, we're seeing these teams shine, and some of them not so much, kind of fall behind. Um, one of my favorite teams to come out this week with some wins was London, who, as we've discussed before, has not looked great this season, but with this 2-2-2 um, enforcement looking really strong, looking really fun. I mean, really crazy alts. The combos were just insane. Like Bergering had a ton of Hanzo alts that just were just so fun to watch. And yeah, what did you think about the London matches? I
Yeah,
guess
it's interesting because they won both of their matches, but I think they were relatively close, like way
that's
closer
true.
than they should have been, given they played against two kind of lower tier teams. So I think they definitely did show a lot of capability in this week with the new Rollock meta. We got to see players like Prophet and Birdring play some of these funner DPS heroes, and even we saw a little bit of guard. But there were signs of struggle against the Fuel and the Defiant that I don't
Yeah.
think should be there, given the quality that those two teams have been playing at. So I'm excited to see where they go when they start to play against some of the higher tier teams, and if they can keep up. But yeah, I mean, obviously, like the most exciting part, or one of the many exciting parts of the playoffs last season, was watching players like Profit and super really fun DPS heroes. So getting an opportunity to see that again and to get Birdring out of Brig Jail and seeing, like you said, these like Orisa halt into Dragon Strike combos and stuff like that. It's a lot of fun. And yeah, no, I'm excited to see if the Spitfire can keep it up against better teams.
Yeah. And speaking of top tier teams, one surprising loss this week came from the New York Excelsior, who lost the LA Gladiators. I definitely was not expecting this, especially because to me, NYXL is one of those teams that shined throughout GOATS and obviously shined season one when 2-2-2 was much more common. And what's going on here? Are they just out of practice? Were they not expecting the LA Gladiators to bring it?
Um, I think there might have been a little bit of underestimating the Gladiators, who were a very strong team, and they did show a lot
Mm-hmm.
of promise in that match, and even the match they lost later on in the week
Yeah, that was a close one.
against the Outlaws. I mean, we saw players like Decay really proving why he was like picked up and is supposedly paid the amount of money he is to be on that team. We saw like Hydration flexing to ball on Busan and then just like tearing them apart, which is pretty crazy. So yeah, I think there was a little bit of underestimation on the Excelsior's part. It was interesting. They are playing. They have now basically benched Sailby because before they were playing this like triple DPS with the Sombra Goat setup with Nene Libero and Sailby, and now they're playing only Libero and Nene, and we're seeing Nene kind of play Sombra a little bit and see some issues on that hero similar to what we kind of saw with some issues that he's had on Zarya in past stages, where there's like some faults in decision making when it comes to like what to do with his ult, and maybe that's coming from communication issues. I'm not sure, but just like EMPing nothing and etc. Like
Yeah,
there are a number of mistakes that they're making that can definitely be attributed to just unfamiliarity with the compositions and heroes that they're choosing to run. So I think that there's certainly a lot of potential there. Obviously, the Excelsior have a lot of talent on their team. It's just kind of be a matter of them figuring out what to do with this meta and like how best to utilize the players that they have, because they do have a lot of talented players like Sableby and Pine, who I don't think are being utilized to their highest potential.
definitely agree. Yeah. So what's interesting here is that LA Gladiators beat NYXL, but then like you said, the match was close, but they did end up losing to the Houston Outlaws later in the week. Houston Outlaws lost, and then Houston Outlaws started the week losing to Paris Eternal, and then Paris lost to LA Valiant. And so it's funny how you have these teams who you see them so strong, and then they'll lose to like a mid-tier team later in the week. I guess that's just an outcome of this changing meta. But yeah, what do you think of the Houston Outlaws performance this week?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they got picked apart in the Paris match where you
Hmm.
had, Soon especially just like running all over players like Linkser and Dante,
Yeah,
and just like getting free range to do what he does best, which is headshot people on Widow.
yep.
And
So
you
happy
have,
to see them
yeah,
finally on the Widow and getting these nasty, nasty clips.
yeah. No, it's great that he's able to play these heroes like Widow and Hanzo that he's a lot more comfortable on. And we did see also Shadowburn come out and play a lot of Mei,
Yeah.
which is a hero that we saw a lot of this week in general. I think
Hmm.
probably the second or third most popular DPS hero pick.
Yeah.
And Shadowburn really did a really good job on Mei in both of their matches. And you say that they lost to the Valiant, but that match was actually very close. That was incredibly winnable for the
That's true.
Eternal.
Yeah, I actually
Uh,
I saw them coming out ahead in that last map, but yeah, I mean it was the sort of thing where it really could have gone either way. You're
right.
right about that.
So definitely, I have a lot of after this week. I have a lot of faith in Paris being able to maybe make a run for one of these, 11 or 12 slot in this play-in bracket,
Hmm.
um, which is something that I think can't be said about necessarily every team that's kind of floating in that area right now.
Yeah. What about
Um,
what do you think about the Outlaws getting there? I mean, Jake and Lynx are like I think they really killed it this week. But do you see them in that spot as well?
no, definitely, they're another team that's fighting hard for that spot. I think that it really is probably going to come down to like one or two of the three teams between the Outlaws, the Valiant, and the Eternal. It's just going to be a matter of like who is winning these like head-to-head battles.
Yeah.
And so far, it looks like the Valiant, well, the Valiant beat Paris, Paris beat Houston.
Hmm.
Maybe the Valiant are going to be the favorites to try and take one of these slots away. I mean, we'll see. I think all of them definitely have the potential, and they've all shown they can kind of make a turnaround here, and maybe give us some real fireworks in this play-in bracket that we're going to see from the 7 and 12 seeded teams.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that is showing how this 2-2-2 lock is really making the league more interesting. And as we mentioned earlier, there are a lot of heroes that we're not seeing, like May. And one player that I thought really shined on May was Sinatra. Let's talk about the San Francisco Shock for a second, who, we're seeing some new old faces on the roster. As we said, Super was only in one match, Sinatra only on one. Um, and yeah, what do you think about this shifting roster?
Yeah, I mean, we did kind of because we saw in the Shock's first map against the Shanghai Dragons in the
Mm,
Stage 3 finals. We kind of saw them previewing what we can expect to see from them this stage, which is more Smurf as a main tank on Orisa, and then Architect and Striker really coming out and proving why they have had a bench slot on this team for the entire season,
hmm.
and really demonstrating their capacity for success on a lot of these heroes. Striker is still one of the best tracers in the league, in my opinion. I think he demonstrated that quite effectively this past weekend.
Yeah, yeah. I should just iterate that San Francisco did beat Seoul Dynasty 3-1. And I think it was it was a fairly close game. It was a fun game. Um, and I think one player who often goes unmentioned but played really really strong this week was actually Moth. And there was like a clip of him on Lucio is like I think is his strong. He's one of the strongest Lucios in the league, where he was just killing it so hard. I'll have to throw in the clip here because it's just so insane, and I feel like he doesn't get that much spotlight. He's also, someone from Worcester, Massachusetts. So I feel like we need to give brother some love here.
I think he went to school in Worcester. Yeah,
Oh,
I think he's
he went to
from it.
Clark, right?
No, he went to WPI. He went to
Oh,
WPI at the
oh,
same
he
time.
went to school with you, yeah.
I mean, I didn't know him at all, but I think he's a
Yeah,
few years younger than me. But yeah,
cool.
um, no, yeah. I mean, Moth definitely has shown that he's one of the strongest main supports in the league, and he is, very capable on both Lucio and Mercy. And
Mm,
something that we saw a lot this week as well is main support players kind of flexing onto Brig and Batiste, which is
yeah,
something that I don't think really many people predicted, where you see kind of like this double flex support setup, where you have like these kind of utility support heroes in Brig and Batiste being played a lot more often on top of heroes like Ana and Zen. What do you think of that kind of meta shift that we've kind of seen a little bit, trying to like counter heroes like strong DPS picks like Tracer and Genji and Hanzo?
I think it's kind of necessary. I mean, like we mentioned with Hoxel and the Genji, that felt like such a carrying choice from Vancouver, and I think it was on Temple of Anubis. I was like, go to Brig, and you'll have a much stronger chance of uh, of holding this. And I think it's also the sort of thing where really it's a very it's really tricky, and I think the pros really need to show us how to do it. It's like it could be very easy not to have enough heals, and to not use these alts correctly, to sort of you don't have the Zen ult, you don't have like these ults to keep you alive if there's a huge push, and they're much more offensive heroes. It shows that these players are just in a whole other league beyond us, and it's really fun to watch.
Yeah, I definitely think there is kind of a respect element to that where you swap to these double flex support setups in order to counter these like hard carry DPS players in their team.
Mm,
And it is kind of a show of respect to the ability of those players to do like what you said Hoxel did on Anubis, which is just like solo carry team fights over and over and over and over
yeah.
again and over and over again. There's a reason he's the best Genji in the world. They're like top two, or
Yeah.
it is an argument. I think he's the best Genji in the world, but
I think
uh,
that's definitely there's a solid argument for that. I mean, even so so yeah, obviously Vancouver Titans played Shanghai and won in the end, but I will say, like Hureg gave Diem a really, gave him a run for his money on Widow. And, I think Shanghai coming off their win last stage maybe wasn't estimating Titans to win this because they had beaten them before. And I think Vancouver really made the right changes to come back, and they showed me that like they have the ability to be more strategic. I guess in my head I've always thought of them as just like they're so good that they can do anything and they don't have to like strategize that hard. But really, what I saw this week was, yeah, they really thought this through, and even when they didn't change, and at least with Shanghai, like they just couldn't take down Haxel. I mean, there was like a sleep by Izayaki on him during one on like Temple Anubis, I think, but otherwise it was just like he would get these blades and like completely destroy them.
mhm. No, yeah, I mean, it's really hard when he's building blades in like 45 seconds or whatever. It was
Yeah,
like
it's
when he has a
insane.
blade every fight, like, I mean, you have no opportunity to rebound.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, you mentioned as well Hureg was somebody that we saw this week come in as the second DPS slot over players like Summonsoo and Stitch, who have been traditionally filling that slot in the lineup in the last few stages. And he really showed why he deserves that slot. And
Yeah.
I think that anybody who came into the stage thinking that the Titans were not going to be able to hang in 2-2-2 because they're like, a go one trick team or whatever. They proved them wrong. I mean,
Yeah.
I think they're definitely still a major competitor and definitely a heavy favorite to be hitting, getting at least into the top 4 of the finals or the playoffs here.
Yeah, I really would have loved to have seen Hureg in the Widow duel that happened during the All Stars.
All Stars, yeah.
I feel like he could have really gone far and like even be, like Carpe and some of these like well-known Widow players. But I suppose now we should talk about the teams who did not do so well and, are in question as far as the, moving the 2-2-2 lock moving forward. For example, Philly and Boston. Really sad to see Boston lose so badly to Guangzhou Charge. There was only 2 games that went 4-0 this week. The other one being Vancouver versus Florida, so that's like an obvious, we know why that happened. Guangzhou beating Boston 4-0 just is sort of sad, especially with us being fans of the team. What's going on? What went wrong?
What didn't go wrong really in that match? They were just totally outclassed. And I think that Guangzhou is a team that at this point is being a little underrated. They had a rough stage 2, but they have turned around in the last stage or so. And I think they are a team that could make a playoff run and be kind of a dark horse candidate. They have a lot of talent. They picked up Fraggy. They traded Kib for him in the Fusion. They've been playing Nero a lot more. They picked up Bishu from the Gladiators. And they even showed, they kind of styled on Boston a little bit on map 4 where they kind of put out their B squad. And they still easily and handily won the map. So I think that Charge is a team that has a lot of potential moving forward through this stage and into the playoffs potentially. So it's not like they got trounced by Florida or something, who also were looking a little bit better in this match, even though they got 4-0'd. So yeah, it's not great. They did play the Hunters very close. That was an easily winnable match. Like that could have gone either way.
Yeah.
And there was a lot more potential shown in that match that gives me at least some hope for the future. But yeah, it's not looking great for the Uprising's chances.
I do remember you mentioning this weekend. You were talking about Aim God's role going forward with the team. Where do you think that's going to go?
Yeah, both of these matches we saw Persia starting in the flex support role over AimGod, and there have been noted issues with AimGod on the team coming out of stage 3, for instance, where we saw them play a lot of Persia, or they played AimGod, but they played Alamo on main support instead of Kelix. It sounds like from rumored sources, there's potentially some personal drama between AimGod and Kelix, which is unfortunate. But yeah, I think that it might be better. They might be better off going forward playing AimGod and Alamo if they don't want to play AimGod and Kelix together. If there's issues, I think that Persia is a strong player, but I think that AimGod is kind of no pun intended, I think he's kind of a transcendental player in terms of his role in the team. And as we talked about with main supports kind of flexing to Brig and Batiste, from what I saw of Kelix when he played Brig, he looked very uncomfortable in that role and on that hero. So if that's something that they want to do more often, I don't know how comfortable Alamo is on Brig, for instance, but I think that he can't really put up a worse performance than, in my opinion, Kelix did.
Yeah.
So it's tricky. You obviously don't want teams to lose because they're being hampered by personal drama and that kind of garbage. You want the team to lose because they are playing worse when they're all playing at their highest capacity.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there obviously were other issues. I think that RCK is very much a like hot or cold player. He's either like doing crazy things or he's kind of like feeding his brains out. So I mean, it's not it's not all up to them not starting Amgon in the flex support role. I don't want it to be kind of a situation with like Elk when Boombox was sick, where everyone was blaming Elk for them
Right.
losing the matches that they did. I think that there are way more issues at hand besides that.
Yeah.
But the other team you mentioned as well, which is a little surprising as to why they're struggling so much, is the Philadelphia Fusion, who
Yeah.
this meta or this 2-2-2 role lock change should favor them with players like Carpe and EQO able to like play heroes they're more comfortable with, presumably.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. So I guess to go over their stats this week, they lost to the Guangzhou Charge in what was actually a quite close game, but they fortunately did not come out ahead. And then they lost to the Chengdu Hunters 2-3, which was also like a fairly close game. But yeah, it just seems they can't like
yeah.
push past that and really rally the team together to get the win ultimately.
Yeah, funnily enough, the same exact two teams the Uprising lost to. So it's a very much a parallel
Yeah,
experience.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think there are actually similar issues on the Fusion where it just kind of seems like they're not like meshing as a team. I don't really know if
Mm-hmm.
there's like further issues in terms of like behind the scenes stuff, but this is a team that like on paper should do really well. They have
Yeah.
strong players in pretty much all of their roles. Noctino is probably a top 5 main support player. Boombox is incredibly strong. Carpe and EQO are two like really great players
Mm-hmm.
on the DPS heroes they're good at. Obviously, EQO played kind of a lot of May rather than his more popular choices, but they're still like they're still such good players that you think they'd be able to pick up these heroes and play them very well.
Yeah.
And then you have Poco, who is an incredibly clutch player.
Yeah.
Um, and like Sato is fine when he's not playing Ryan, and we're not seeing Ryan. So like
Yeah.
this in theory should be good for them. And you did say they did lose both their matches, and they were both very close. They both went to map 5, and they both are against teams that I think are being underrated in the Charge and the Hunters. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not like a total death knell for this team. But I don't know. What do you think about the Fusion performance and kind of what they look like potentially going forward into potential playoff berth?
It definitely is disappointing. It's maybe, I mean, in my mind, maybe it's, they're just so, I feel like their focus is not on point at this, as it is right now. They probably focus so much on like goats and that meta and kind of coming out ahead in there and just fell short. And now, as the meta is shifting again, they're not as focused on that. And yeah, it's really disappointing because it's obviously a team that we saw in the finals last year and are sort of underwhelming this time around. To me, it's really sad to see Carpe not shine as much. Last year he was like the top widow, and as we saw in the widow duel during the All Stars game, he lost first round. It was totally jarring. But I think that kind of speaks to his performance in general this year. Unfortunately, like you said, on paper it makes this team look really strong, but I think these little things where they're underperforming add up to something bigger, as you mentioned, even like with Sato uh, kind of not performing strong enough as well. It's just those little tiny things seem to be adding up, and these games that they should ultimately be winning, they can't bring it together for some reason. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think there's actually a lot of parallelism to I think with what we saw out of the Excelsior this week, where like on paper the team should be performing much better than they are in reality in practice. So
I mean, do you think a switch up in the roster might help them? Is there anyone on their bench that they could pull out? from the
I mean,
Forge.
they do have Kib now. I think that Kib is a extremely strong, underrated player, and
Yeah,
if players like Carpe and EQO aren't living up to the potential that they should have, then maybe flexing Kib into the roster for a map here and there could bring them some success. But it's very
yeah,
difficult when you have this roster who have basically played together for like a year and a half, 2 years at this point,
yeah,
and to like try and break that up and bring in new faces, even if it isn't working, is definitely a big thing to ask. I think we saw a little bit with London, where they have Quatermain coming in for Nuss every now and then, and we see them bring in like guard to play. Usually Sombra in a couple of situations on some maps here and there when they think it makes sense.
mm-hmm.
But it definitely is a lot to ask for these teams who have these like kind of iconic 6-man rosters to like play around with them.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, another point to that is just that because they've stuck to this roster, maybe they're easier to plan against. I'm sure the coaches on the Chengdu Hunters and the Guangzhou Charge, they saw a lot of these plays coming from Philly Fusion. But I think that's it. Even though I love both of these teams, Boston and Philly, I'm glad to see the 2-2-2 lock because it just made this week so much more fun and so much more like hectic, which I think we as Overwatch players and fans want to see. Even if it's like insane. I remember sending like a gift to someone once to explain Overwatch to them, and they were like, "I have no clue what's going on. Like, this just looks insane." And I was like, "Yeah, that's the point. It's like so fun." And if I'd send them a gif of like goats, it would just be like, "All right, this looks kind of boring and like."
Everyone's pressing buttons and nothing is happening.
Yeah. So it's I think even though I'm sad to see these teams um, not adjusting quite well enough, I'm glad on the whole. I think this week was like super super fun. Um, and with that, I think we should wrap up the show. But I am curious about who you think the MVP will go to.
I mentioned this when we talked about it at the top of the show. I think that Sinatra is the favorite right now.
Mm,
I think that probably the second most likely is Twilight. I would be very surprised if it weren't one of those two players.
yeah.
I think the main reason why Twilight might be given the nod over Sinatra is because Twilight is much more likely to see consistent play throughout the stage and through the playoffs, whereas Sinatra is probably going to be flexed in and out in favor of players like Striker and Architect, who are more capable of playing the DPS heroes that we're
Yeah.
seeing more commonly in this meta so far. So
Hmm.
that's the only reason why I would consider leaning towards Twilight over Sinatra, but I think it is probably going to be one of those two players. What do you
Yeah,
think?
I agree completely. I wouldn't mind it being Sinatra or Twilight. I think they're both really, really strong players. Obviously, that they deserve to be in this selection. The only player that I'm really against it going to is Super, and at this point, I think I'm pretty confident in it not going to him just because of the 2-2-2 lock, and we're gonna probably see less of him. And I think that goes towards Sinatra too, where you know us player or us viewers are going to be voting for this, and as well as the casters. But if a player's not on the field, he's not on our minds, and he's much less likely to get our vote in the end. Uh, it would be cool to see Gouchway get it, just because if the Vancouver Titans and the San Francisco Shock end up going to the finals, it'd be nice to see an MVP that wasn't in the finals. But I think he's probably not most people's first pick. And we also have to think about, what kind of skin we'll be getting next year, because obviously this year we got the Jonak, the really sweet Jonak Zenyatta skin. If it's Twilight, maybe we'll get like a really sweet Ana skin, or if it's Sinatra, maybe a Zarya skin. I mean, it depends, I guess, what he plays going forward. I think he played like May, maybe Doomfist. I think he went on Doomfist as well this week. Uh, but yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think that if Sinatra is going to win the MVP award, it'll probably be off of mostly off of his performance in the first three stage on Zarya. So I think it would make the most sense to commemorate that part of his performance in the season. Obviously, if the Shock do end up winning, and even if Sinatra is playing some of these DPS heroes throughout the playoffs, it's still going to be, I think, in most people's minds, favored towards the first 75% of the season, where he did make the he basically he reinvented how Zarya is played. Like his play style on that hero is just totally different from everyone else's, and he was just in a level of his own in terms of tiering players. So. I would definitely agree with you. I think that if we were to see Twilight, it probably would be an Ana skin, and if we were to see Sinatra, it would probably be a Zarya skin.
Yeah. Well, my MVP out of outside of these five, honestly, I might give it to Chayobin, because he's just been such a great roadhog, and to me has been pulling this team out of some really tricky situations, especially during the both Shanghai matches. Chayobin, I think, super underrated, but yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see who ends up winning.
Yeah, definitely. Choi Hyobin is definitely a player that I don't think gets the credit he deserves, because he's kind of just quietly really good. He's not flashy, and he's definitely shown with this meta shift that he's able to not only be an incredible D.Va player, but also play Roadhog very competently, which is with the Shock kind of flexing their lineup around. He is one of basically two or three players, basically him and Moth, and then I guess Violet as well, who is also quietly very good.
Yeah. I could have seen Violet in the MVP.
Listen,
all
of the players in the Shock are insane. That's why they're one of the best teams in the league, if not the best team in the league. I mean, but yeah, I think that Choi Hyobin is somebody who is just quietly really strong, and has shown a lot of competency so far in this new meta on Roadhog. So yeah, there's a lot of good choices that I think were left on the table. But I mean, there's only 5 slots, and when there are so many insane players, obviously somebody's going to get snubbed.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so I guess with that, thank you everybody for watching Overwatch League Report this week. I just want to reiterate something from last week. We are very, very much open to collaborating. If anyone ever wants to be on the show, we're totally open to it. We'd love to discuss this stuff with everyone. So yeah, make sure to like the video, hit the bell button if you haven't, so you can stay updated with all of our videos. We have a lot of really cool stuff planned for you, including some weird, obscure history lessons from Brian, as well as podcasts and more Let's Plays and things like that. So make sure to keep, subscribe to us, or subscribe if you haven't already, and like us on Facebook and Twitter and all of those good places.
Instagram, yeah.
Instagram.
And follow Brian and Dylan's podcast on iTunes, and basically anywhere you could possibly imagine a podcast could be. I believe it should be there.
Yeah.
They've been cranking them out recently. They did a review on Lion King. They talked about some of these new Marvel movies coming up. They've just been cranking out podcast after podcast.
Yeah.
It's probably a backlog of 5 or 6 ones that are still culturally relevant enough. I know they're planning on talking about the movie that new Tarantino movie that just came out. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So
yeah,
I think there's a lot of good content coming to the channel.
Yeah, we might
So,
see like
yeah.
a midsummer review, which I might be a part of. So yeah,
Perfect.
so make sure to stay tuned. And yeah, from Ben and Tamur, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next week. Take care.